It's our March.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, Lauren. It is our March PTAC meeting, PTAC being the Pedestrian and Transit Advisory Committee. Meredith is our acting secretary. Thank you. Let's start with roll call of our actual members, starting with Ted Alexander, who I don't see, Ginny Alverson, who I also don't see, Caroline Boediger, no, Meredith Brown, here, Laura Evans,
here,
Christopher Ferry. I see Christopher.
This is there.
I'm here. You were just frozen for a second on my end.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Christopher. Vitor Pamplona.
Here.
Zach Rosenberg.
Here.
Alessandra Seto, myself. Harold Bugaris. Here. And our ex officio, Willem Baugh, will not be here tonight. Lauren Craig. Here. And Justin Schreiber.
Here.
Awesome. Oh, and Ted just walked in.
Yeah.
Hello. So glad to have the video too. Okay, our guests, let's start with guests in person. Just say your name, your ward, and why you're here tonight, whether you're here for a specific agenda item or just interested or presenting. And then we can transition to the folks online as well. So let's start with.
Hey, Pascal Vitalis, resident of Ward 5, seeing what's going on and trying to contribute as a community member.
Joel Paul, Ward 4, and yeah, interested in what's going on.
Sorry, can you say your name one more time?
Joel Paul.
Got it. What ward? Sorry. Nikki Green, she, her, they, them pronouns. But I'm a Somerville resident, and I work for the city as the AD field associate for the engineering department.
I'm Brian Huflake. I'm the director of engineering, and I also happen to live in Ward 5.
I'm Jesse News. I'm construction lead for the city, also engineering, Ward 1.
Just the vanilla and Awesome. Okay, for folks online, are you okay with doing this part, Lauren?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Lauren is gonna allow you to talk, and you'll see like a button come up on your screen that will ask you to unmute. So when you get that option, again, just say your name, your ward, and why you're here. Let's start with Jim McGinnis.
Yeah, Jim McGinnis, I'm in Union Square. I'm interested in seeing what's happening with McGrath Highway plan.
Awesome. So are we. Let's go to Julia Levine. Do you see a pop-up on your screen, Julia, that's asking you to unmute?
Hi. Yeah, I'm interested in the McGrath Highway discussion. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you for being here. And our friend Karen Malloy.
Hi, Karen Malloy from Somerville Transportation Equity Partnership and Somerville Alliance for Safe Streets. And I thought my camera was on. I'm sorry, it's not. Anyway, I'm here, like others, to hear the discussion about McGrath Boulevard.
Amazing. And we have two more people who just walked in. Let's start with Nick.
I'm Nick. I'm a resident, and I'm interested in what's happening. And I'm a transportation planner.
Cool. And you?
Hi, I'm Heather Hoffman. I am from East Cambridge and interested in finding out what is going on with the McGrath Highway in the intense hope that the O'Brien Highway will also become a better place.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that covers everyone. Thank you everyone for being here. We won't get to McGrath for a little while, so I hope you find the engineering update also extremely interesting, as we all will. So let's do some bureaucratic stuff. Do we have any discussion on our February minutes? Seeing none, I motion to approve them. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great, thank you, Meredith. All approved, please say, or I'm sorry, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Awesome. All opposed? Okay, minutes are passed. On to subcommittee updates. Did policy and enforcement meet this month?
No.
Great. Did engineering and evaluation meet this month?
Nope.
Great. Education engagement met.
We did. So yeah, we talked about plans for a walk on Broadway in April. That is a friendly date. I was
April
wondering,
23rd.
April 23rd. So everyone please come. Looking at plans for the street redesign there. And yeah, then we kind of planned out our engagement plans for the rest of the summer, the spring, summer. So looking at going to maybe the Union Square Farmers Market in August, and some of the street tabling events that we've done in the past, like Carnival and other stuff. So we'll be letting you know about those as they come up, but please come and join us and table with us. It'd be great. Anything else, Alessandra, that we covered?
We talked about Streetwise a little bit,
Yes.
like getting more involved with them.
Yeah, so we're, everyone, for those of you who don't know, there's a Streetwise talk series that's at Aeronaut Brewery every month. Often kind of organized by folks from the bike committee mainly, but they're interested or they have been doing things beyond bikes and are interested in doing more of that. So we talked about partnering with them. I think we are looking for, when we have new members for our subcommittee, to kind of help us out with engaging with that opportunity.
Cool. I think that's it for subcommittee updates, unless someone did something outside of the subcommittees that they would like to tell us about. Great. Cool. So let's talk about engineering and our construction updates with our guests. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yes. Thank you for having us this evening. We've been trying to come to these meetings about once a year, and it's always a pleasure to see how active and involved this committee is. Lauren, can I get, you still working on that? Okay.
Yeah, it's thinking.
I totally understand. Well, I can start off, because I know McGrath is a big thing, so I'll try to move through our stuff. And the first bit is we can just talk to. When we talk about our street rehabilitation projects in the city, we have an annual rehabilitation project. And that rehabilitation project lasts for 2 years, the actual construction contract. So when I talk about, or when we talk about a construction project and this or such and such of item is in a particular year, that means that it's going to be built over a 2-year period. So it's not necessarily built in the year that the project is numbered. So I just so that we understand what that means. And I think it's also important, I know mobility comes in and says, hey, we're going to be, this is in the contract or this is in the project for this year. It could take us a year to actually get on the ground and build it because we have to work with our contractor to really organize what's the best procedures for construction. When we are planning our rehabilitation projects, the very first thing that we look at now, and this is a change over the past few years, the first thing that we look at is sidewalks. And we are primarily looking for ADA sidewalks, ADA crosswalks, increased pedestrian safety, and increased street tree health. Those are the key things that we're looking for, and we are prioritizing our streets based on what those sidewalk priorities are. So I'm going to do a quick review of our sidewalk priorities. It comes down to a combination of 2 key elements. The first is our sidewalk condition index. And
it keeps quitting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
Try sharing?
if you could try sharing, sorry, it keeps quitting out after 10 seconds.
I'm going to try to, in lieu of the slides, I'm going to try to describe what I'm talking about verbally, and when this catches up, that'll be good. So sidewalk condition index is the actual condition of the pavement in the sidewalk. And so what we can see on the screen is in 2020, 2021, and 2022, we did an analysis of all the sidewalks in the city over that period of time and rated the sidewalks just on the condition of the sidewalks itself. So that's one part of the analysis that we do. On to the next slide. This is the functional classification. And so we're taking all these priority factors in no particular order. In fact, in general, they tend to all be weighted very similarly because weighting them differently doesn't actually change the results that much. The results have more to do with what we chose were priority factors. And though the image is a little hard to read, the locations that come out most critical are places like Davis Square, East Somerville, Gilman Square, Central Hill, Union Square. Those are the green areas that you can see that pop out. While areas that are more peripheral to the city, more peripheral to our business areas, tend to be ranked lower. We take those two components on the next slide. We take those two components, the sidewalk condition index and the sidewalk classification priority. You'll have to bear with me. I've changed the names of these so many times that I don't even in my presentations keep them straight. So there's the index and then there's the priority of the route for people using them. We combine those two data together and we come up with a route classification that gives us the priority of what needs to be built first. And so then, I don't know if the next page has it or not. Yeah, next page goes into partial paving. So the key is this gives us a rank ordered list of all of the streets in the city and which sidewalks really should be built first. And we break that up into 5-year chunks. In those 5-year chunks, we prioritize them primarily based, well, I'll get to how we prioritize that in a moment, but we break them up into 5-year chunks. And that's the 5-year pavement plan for sidewalks. We do the same thing on the next slide for partial paving, which is just paving the center roadway lane. This one, we only worry about the condition of the pavement. This is real. The goal here is really to preserve the asset. So we do a similar analysis for that, much quicker because it is just the condition index. Next slide. And then we do another analysis, and this is more of our complete streets analysis. This is looking again at all of the streets in the city, all of the, and we have a similar pavement condition index, but also a priority analysis, similar to like we did with sidewalks, but for the entire street corridor. And that develops a list of complete streets. So like our West Washington reconstruction, our Pearl Street reconstruction, our Holland College construction over the past few years. That's the analysis that they came out on. So now we have 3 different pieces that we're looking at, and they're 3 really important aspects of our system. We then have to take those, each of them has a 5-year component to it, and now we pull those together into construction contracts. And one of the key things that we do is we take the construction logistics of those and pull them together. So with partial paving and sidewalks, we're looking at the utility construction that's going on. We're looking at private utility construction that's going on. We're trying to coordinate those things together so that we're not paving a sidewalk or a roadway before we're going out to do utility work, whether it's natural gas, Eversource, or whether it's the city. We're also combining that with the partial paving and the sidewalks together, because if we see a partial paving job and a sidewalk job in the same 5-year chunk, even if they're on opposite ends of the priority list, we're going to pull them together into the same year because it's more efficient for us to do them in the same year. And if we can do them in the same year, it makes sense to do full curb to curb repaving, which just means that we have a longer living asset. And then the last thing we're doing is we're trying to consolidate our projects geographically so that we're not having a contractor jump all the way around the city. And so that and also there's an aspect of pulling off the Band-Aid more quickly so that a neighborhood isn't having to endure a little bit of construction every single year. So that's the goal there. Our 2024 street list is up on the right. All of these, because we're just starting this analysis, combining the streets, the sidewalks, and the partial paving, there's a large list of streets that just happen to need both. And so we're focusing on them. So all the streets that you see are being constructed, both the sidewalks and the roadway. We call them a full street reconstruction, as opposed to partial paving or sidewalk only. Next page. This year, in lieu of doing a complete streets project, like a corridor, frankly, we have our hands full with a bunch of projects in design, namely Tufts and West Broadway for upcoming years, but also we have a number of construction projects that we're working on, namely West Washington. So we're kind of boiling it down to something a little more manageable that fits in our workflow better this year, and we're focusing on complete intersections. And we're doing this based out of really good success over the past few years of targeting intersections with our complete streets work. And we know that most safety issues occur when traffic intersects each other, whether it's vehicular, pedestrian, transit. When traffic streams intersect, the likelihood of accidents increase, crashes increase, and those are the areas that we've had really good success targeting infrastructure improvements. It's not the only thing we do. It's not the most important thing we do, but it has been very successful. And so we felt that this year would be a good year to focus predominantly on them. So now I'm going to jump. We could go through the individual ones, and actually, why don't I give a moment? I've been speaking really quickly. Give a moment for questions if anyone has any.
I am curious, you mentioned that the prioritization framework was a little bit different from previous years. I'm curious how you made the decision to change the priorities that are more based on sidewalk reconstruction. Like, just what was the impetus for it?
Sure, it's a really good question. So our priority matrix has changed a lot over the past decade. I'd say about 10 years ago or so, it was not a data-driven process. It was a gut feel process, arguably political process at times. So about 8 years ago, we switched over to do a data-driven process where we're analyzing the streets and trying to understand pavement conditions. And when we started that analysis, it was only bringing up major street reconstructions. And the little side streets were never getting touched. And after a few years of that, the number of complaints that we got for a little street having really, really bad pavement issues was a problem. So we added on the partial paving component to it. Like, we can't pave the whole thing. We clearly have these small streets that we need to get done. And so that's how we added in the partial paving. At about the same time, we were realizing that we were and we'll get to this in a moment, our 2013 transition plan for ADA. And we're realizing that we were starting to run a little behind on accomplishing those transition plan goals. And at about the same time, I was ramping up and doing more work with the Disability Commission, and decided to work with them to come up with a process to start looking at sidewalks separately. And so what that did is allowed us to say, let's look at pedestrian impacts separately from all traffic impacts, separately from really local street impacts. And look at all of them separately. They all have different demands on our infrastructure. Let's prioritize them separately and then combine them into construction projects that are efficient and effective, rather than making all of them rely on just one component of it.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Exciting.
Do we have a goal for, you showed the map with many of the colors that you laid out. Is there a minimum that we would like the city to be? Is it all green? Is it all, blue? Is there a minimum? And if there is a minimum, is there a time scale that we can achieve that? Like, how are we thinking about that far ahead?
That's a deep question. Actually, go back one page earlier, 2 pages earlier, because I think you're really referring to the condition of the streets. I'm sorry, it was just 1 page earlier. The next page about like the priority location, that shouldn't change every year until geography changes, until our uses change, and we wouldn't want that to all be green, because that would mean our entire city, there's no difference from one neighborhood to the next. Ideally, this would all look blue.
Okay.
Yellow, and you can see in the left where we have prescribed activities to it. These are it's really the blue is the sweet spot. That is something where we're monitoring, we're looking at it. It's not brand new. It's at the longest point of its lifespan. And if it was all blue, that means when things dropped into yellow, we would do spot repairs, and we wouldn't have to do full sidewalk reconstruction. Right. We would just focus on an individual location. So that would be the goal. The likelihood that we can get to that goal with a reasonable budget in a reasonable time, I just don't see it in our immediate future.
But we don't know how many years would it take to get the yellow, oranges, and reds to blue.
I don't. Yeah. I don't know how many years.
Because I think that number could be interesting for political reasons, just to get fundraising going on and try to do more as a city.
Yeah.
Because clearly we have work to do.
Yes. One other thing that I think is worth noting is that there's another reason why, even if this whole map today showed blue, and the sidewalks that were built in the 70s and 80s and 90s were still up, were being maintained to the degree that kept them in the yellow-blue range, we would still need to replace them. Right. Because ADA didn't occur until 93, 94, I always get the year wrong. A lot of the sidewalks that were built before then, even those in good condition, were not up to current ADA standards, and we would have to replace them anyway. And so that's what gets into, and now why don't we move over to the transition plan slide for a moment. In our 2013 transition plan, we identified 125 priority locations throughout the city that needed to be improved to bring them up to ADA compliance. That doesn't bring everything up to compliance. It was at 10, 12 years ago, that was the level that everybody felt was important. And so that was the goal. Since then, we've addressed 90 of them. We have 13 of them under contract, either that are currently in construction or, in the case of West Broadway, are currently in design. And then we have 22 other priorities that are planned for clearly planned future projects. And so, and many of those are in the FY25 and FY26 projects that we know are coming. Others are in larger scale capital improvement plans that we also have in the works. And why I invited Nikki to join us here is Nikki is helping us with this plan in particular. She's working in the streets, making sure that ADA compliance is maintained in construction, but also helping us move forward the transition plan, because we're right now working on a new plan with Adrian Pomeroy, our ADA coordinator. Thank you. So that's an active process that's going on right now. And so we expect there to be a new set of priority locations. And my hope is that the sidewalk analysis program that we're doing is that priority system, so that it's not something that happens once a decade. It's something that we do every year, constantly updating it, so that we can get to the point where we are bringing that down to a more reasonable number of sidewalks that need to be put. So we were going to move on to construction,
ahead.
but I'm happy
Question
to
first.
continue to answer questions.
Sorry, is there a map like with the sidewalk quality index for the streets?
We do have a map for that. I was focusing on the pedestrian component here. We do have an analysis very comparable to that of our roadways, as well as the priority index that combines the full street together. Yeah.
Just biking down like Central Street, I feel like I'm about to fly off the bikes because of how bumpy it is, especially with the electric bikes here. Not very forgiving.
Which part of Central Street?
From the top of Winter Hill down to the community path. So they're right there. So just going down that hill to get to the path is just very treacherous.
Should we move on to construction? And the second is, what are we on time? Should I speed up, slow down?
We have
Continue.
about 15 minutes left on this agenda item.
Okay, all right. Okay, then we'll be fine. So Jesse is here who's our construction liaison. He manages most of the interaction on our construction projects with the community in general. This is Jesse's great product, which is every year we put together this map of construction.
Yeah, sure. So this is my 7th construction season about to begin. April 1st is the official start date, even though we really do construction all year round now as weather is failing us. So if you look at this map on the legend on the left, all the orange is what Brian was just kind of talking to, addressing sidewalk reconstruction, which are some of these smaller streets, but also if you look at Western Washington at the bottom, that's our kind of our major project this year, as well as finishing up the sidewalks on Holland College. We did a portion of Holland last year, and now we're coming back to kind of do the 2 other ends of it. Another thing we kind of look at is all the red is trench restorations by Eversource and National Grid. They're our 2 biggest contractors in the city. When they come back and they do trench restoration paving, which is partial paving, but not the center, more to the gutter line, kind of going where the trench is. They also will replace sidewalk panels that they install laterals in. So that's another way that sidewalks are repaired and made better. And then right in the center, that's my baby, the big yellow, that's our Spring Hill project. And it doesn't call it out, but there's a lot of sidewalk replacement on there, including Summer Street, School Street, and Highland Ave, which was not getting its sidewalks replaced, but will be paved this year from Benton Road to McGrath. Any questions about all of this? It's a lot to take in all at once. I stare at this all day long, so I might take a little bit for granted.
Well, I have a side question on the utilities work. How do we think about moving the utility poles with electric on top underground? Is there a strategy for that, or to get the poles out of the sidewalk?
Sure. So this is a question that comes up all the time. And one of the issues is the amount of space we actually have underground to put electric utilities with sewer, with water, with possibly its own drain, and gas line. So there really is not space for that. The other problem with that is if it is then underground, if there is, you know, an outage or something, and they're gonna dig into a fresh street. Then you're gonna mess with the street and also possibly the sidewalk. So there's a give and take to that. And it's not possible at every location. We were able to do it on Lower Somerville Ave as part of our Somerville Ave streetscape improvement project. But it's not a like can happen everywhere situation. You want to do that?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, it is, first off, the city doesn't own the utility poles. They're owned by Eversource, and they have 3, sometimes 5 different utilities on them. The relocating them underground, Eversource can't pay for it, and the private utilities can't pay for it. The DPU doesn't allow them to. DPU is the Department of Public Utilities. It's a state, because they're not allowed to increase the rates for customers to put that underground, because it's operating equipment. Now, new corridors that they build, that's pretty easy to require them to put underground, but existing ones, they're not allowed to take it. So the money has to come from somewhere, and finding where that money comes from is really, really challenging. Because to a certain degree, it's a zero sum. If the money to do that, if we spend the money to do that, we have to take that money from somewhere else. Where else? What other priority isn't as important? And that's just always a challenging conversation, especially for a piece of infrastructure that the city doesn't own or maintain. I would also point out that Somerville has surprisingly few power outages for a city our size. And I say that knowing that we've probably all experienced it at one point. But those power outages usually last for much less than 24 hours, usually counted in hours, not days, like most of power outages in the state. And that has a lot to do with the fact that we have a utility system that's extraordinarily dense, which means for the number of utility poles, for the amount of infrastructure, they have a lot of customers on it. So it's really, really in the utility company's best interest to repair those very quickly, because the repair time versus the number of impacted customers is so small. I'm not arguing for their good. I'm just, it's really hard to justify putting them underground.
Interesting.
From a cost benefit standpoint.
Yeah, I'm always coming in from a user experience standpoint. Like it's just better, and it's, you know, the view is better. There's less obstacles in the middle of the way. Trees can grow, but I can understand that it's a difficult choice.
I had a quick question, and maybe this is more for mobility, but the mobility project on Eastern Washington, is that something that we've talked about in this committee, or?
That's the MBTA.
Oh, okay.
Are they adding a protected bike or bus lane, or?
It might just be the painting red that exists in the bus lane, crashing Interbelt Road. There's some work this year to make it red.
Okay.
There's also the floating bus stop.
Oh, right.
Corner,
Sorry.
which is also part of it. They kind of attach together, so probably can't tell probably didn't distinguish between them. But yeah, those are the key things going on Eastern Washington.
Cool.
It's kind of forgot about the red. So we wanted to take a minute to talk about construction zones and how we prioritize traffic flow around typically private construction projects, but sometimes public construction projects as well. And again, very similar to our rehabilitation planning, the first thing that we're looking at is pedestrians. So in this case, sidewalks. So we're making sure that the construction plan meets ADA and AAB requirements. We're also trying to minimize pedestrians crossing major roadways. So keeping the pedestrian path on the same side of the roadway. We tend to prefer scaffolding or bypasses over detours that take you to the other side of the road or to another road altogether. And then also trying to focus on consistency. From a purely construction standpoint, they have different things going on every day. It would make sense for them to have something different every day to meet that, but they usually can't meet the quality that we're expecting if they're changing it all the time. And it also is very confusing for the pedestrians because most pedestrians are going down the same corridors every day. So we want to try to keep some consistency on it. Roadway closures themselves are a little bit different because vehicles have a lot more flexibility. Even bicycles have more flexibility to their daily travel than a pedestrian does. And so we are looking to generally maintain local traffic. And what we mean by local traffic is traffic that is accessing properties along that street. That's what local traffic is. So local traffic could be people from out of town if they're accessing properties along that corridor. We're also prioritizing two-way transit and emergency traffic. So if we lost everything else, we would be maintaining that. There have been times where we have closed down roadways entirely except for emergency and transit. One of the few exceptions when we absolutely can't is if there's a large crane or we're paving, because both of those two make it really difficult to continue either of those things going on. Emergency traffic, we can always find a way, but we usually don't want buses driving through fresh asphalt. And then the next things we're looking at is prioritizing closing of parking lanes, double lanes. We don't have many double lanes left in the city, but and turn lanes. And then we will prioritize narrowing over removing bicycle lanes or closing down bicycle lanes. Bicycle lanes tend to be the last thing that we try to close down. But sometimes that's all we have left to work with. A couple things to observe: that deliveries to private properties are permitted to obstruct traffic by municipal ordinance. So the roadway is there in part to service the abutting properties. So we can't usually restrict vehicles loading and unloading if that's their only way to access the adjacent parcel. The other piece is that public safety officers are detail officers. They're authorized to redirect traffic at their full discretion. They have the last word on the street in any condition. So please pay that mind when you're around a public safety officer. So before we move on, I have a couple of images here. This is an example of where we have constructed a pedestrian bypass. This is down on Somerville Avenue. But the key point here is that we closed down the parking lane and we moved, we created a pedestrian bypass so that they could so the contractor could close off the sidewalk and do their do the facade of the building and to reconstruct the sidewalk. And because we could use the parking lane, we were able to maintain all the vehicular lanes. So next page. This is an example of where we did both. So, so in this case, Beacon Street is on the bottom, and I think it's Prepared C is on the side. Is it Prepared C? Ivaloo, thank you. Is the side street. So what we did here is we created a pedestrian bypass in the bike lane. We couldn't close down. I mean, we did close down the parking lane, but because of the design of the street, we couldn't use that parking lane for the pedestrians. So we used the bicycle lane for the pedestrians. But the other point is on Ivaloo, it's a small street. It was reasonable to direct pedestrian traffic to the other side of the street, which had the additional benefit of saying all deliveries and construction access came off of Ivaloo Street, which meant that construction access wasn't crossing sidewalk traffic because that sidewalk was already closed. So that's an example where we use the different tools to different effects. And penultimate slide. This is an example. This is down on East Broadway, where the contractor, and this was a crane, they had a huge crane that they had to put out. And I think they even used this plan after the crane was gone because it worked really well, where they used scaffolding and they used their own property to create a bypass around the sidewalk that was, and in this case, the sidewalk wasn't necessarily under construction, but they needed to use the sidewalk as their space to do their construction. And they did pass through the sidewalk area, but they had gates on either side. They controlled crossing of the sidewalk, but it provided a safe space on that side of the street, crossing what effectively feels like 6 lanes of traffic, even though it's only 2.5, was not something that was appropriate for a major arterial in a large business district. So these are the different types of thinking that we go through when we're looking at our traffic management plans. In last slide, I believe, is, yeah. So this is just an example of how we manage construction detours. So here's an example where we had large construction, and this is ongoing today. Between Central and School Street, we have Eversource is working on a gas project, and over towards Walnut, our Spring Hill project is working on some utility work. So between those two projects, we couldn't really maintain two-way traffic. We'd already gotten rid of parking lanes. We didn't have any bike lanes to work with. So we knew we had to break down and redirect traffic. So in this case, we took one direction of traffic and detoured it and maintained the other direction of traffic. And though, given the different construction that's going on here, we're still focusing on consistency. We tried to come up with a plan that would work from the beginning to the end. The other key point here is that by maintaining one direction of traffic and only one direction of traffic and having detail officers out there, we're able to provide two-way traffic for the 88 and the 90 bus that goes down this corridor, which is key for transit access. It would also be really challenging to direct the buses down Medford Street. Second is it means that we have complete emergency access, but also just basic maintenance access, garbage trucks, delivery trucks, and so forth, still have access to the corridor. They just have to reroute, so they're only going in the one direction. So I think that's the last one, and that's just an overview of how we're doing this. This is probably traffic management plans for both pedestrians and vehicles is probably about 1/3 to 1/2 of the job of our permitting side. Whether it's reviewing these or inspecting them out in the field. We have a new traffic engineer now who's going to be able to help us expand our capacity, and Nikki's going to be helping us expand our capacity in the field of inspecting and making sure that the bypasses and detours and scaffolding and so forth are all ADA compliant. So
That's a second traffic engineer.
we have a second traffic engineer, yeah.
Amazing.
And Nikki's position is new this year too. So we're a lot more construction. We're trying to make sure that we're meeting the community's expectations, as well as keeping our streets safe.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This is super helpful and really exciting to hear about some of the changes that you've been making. They all sound really great. We are over time on this agenda item, but only by 2 minutes, which is totally fine. So maybe we have time for like one really good question. If anybody, like they have.
Judged on your question.
All right, Ted,
Yeah,
a really good question.
I raised my hand before you said. So yeah, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what kind of monitoring you do after the plan has been implemented.
We have an inspector who is Paul, just kind of drives around all our major construction sites. He got just like, it's in his roots. Or he just checks it out, he talks, he's also, get out of the car sometimes and actually talk to the contractor just to make sure the signs are in the right spot. Especially for something like this, where like, if one sign's not there, the traffic's not gonna flow the way we want it to flow. So he's on top of it. It's also, 301 will report to us. We have our Twitter account. You guys can tweet at us if you find something in the field that's an issue. We try and correct it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, the ADA email address comes to us too, so any complaints go there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. It's always great to see you guys once a year. So we look forward to 2025. We are going to move on to our discussion of McGrath. You guys are welcome to stick around, but also if you'd like to get your night, you're welcome to do that as well. So I think mobility has. Oh yeah, I think we're gonna move on, unfortunately. But I think mobility has a slide or two on McGrath, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Alessandra asked us to provide a quick overview. I'm going to skip many of these slides because there's some great background you can read. Massa just had a public meeting. There's a link here to their presentation. But just want to spend most of the time having you guys discuss. But the big picture is McGrath Boulevard is a reconstruction project from MassDOT. There's a photo on the right, the scope of work in purple, all the way from Broadway in Somerville to 3rd Street in Cambridge. This is not the new pavement you see today on McGrath. This is a much, much larger project to completely reconstruct McGrath. The sort of centerpiece of that is taking down the viaduct over Washington Street and replacing it with an at-grade boulevard. Traffic has actually dropped 34% on McGrath since 2011. The overpass is overbuilt. It's ugly. It's a physical barrier that cuts off some of our neighborhoods. And throughout the corridor, accessibility standards are not met. If you click that link on the bottom, we talked a little bit about Somerville's sort of history of advocacy around McGrath. There's a good link to a nice video that was created about that. So state project, city's been pushing, but also the community's been pushing for this project for quite a long time. I'm going to skip the next slide. This is mainly about how it's funded by the Boston Region MPO. Brad Rawson, our director, sits on the MPO. Somerville is an intercore representative on the MPO, and if you click on those links, you can dive into the details around how this project is funded. That's a picture of the viaduct that's coming down on the right. So MassDOT held a public information meeting back in February to sort of re-engage the public on this project. I've got a link there to the full presentation. They will hold a 25% design hearing either late this year or early next year. That's sort of a required step in MassDOT's process. However, we're encouraging folks to provide comments at any time. They're not at 25%, but they're actively advancing the design. Just a couple bullets from the meeting a couple weeks ago that you guys may want to discuss a little more in a few minutes. They would remove one travel in each direction, so 2 through lanes and 3 in each direction. That's positive. There's sort of less asphalt than the last concept they published a couple of years ago, which is great. It's also consistent with what the quick build project that's happening right now, which took a lane out in each direction. They've got curb separated bike lanes. I believe it's sidewalk level throughout the corridor. There's some right-of-way constraints, so if you dive into the plan, you'll see it's 2-way on one side in certain areas and 1 on each side in other areas. They're proposing a new crosswalk, McGrath Cross Street and Greenville on the other side, connecting East Somerville to Prospect Hill. It's actually kind of a big deal because there's a big grade change between those streets. So the fact that this crossing was in the concept was great. They're also proposing removing the footbridge over McGrath and replacing it with an at-grade crossing. Something you guys might want to discuss a little more. it's sort of long been in the plans, and there's different pros and cons depending on, exactly how they design it, and we don't know exactly how they'll design it today. There are some transit facilities, short sections of bus lane, queue jumps at intersections, floating bus stops where bus service exists today. No sort of new bus service or new bus facilities proposed. And then there's one more link there to the full presentation. We talked about this in January, but high level, we want to prioritize all modes of transportation, particularly non-vehicular modes. We want to include transit facilities as much as we can, noting that of course increases the width of the road, and one of the big deals about this project is making the road smaller. We want to minimize the intersection sizes as much as possible, and we want this project to sort of advance the neighborhood level planning that's gone on. I think that's it. So stop talking.
Awesome, thank you, Justin. So I think the goal for tonight is to talk through kind of our assessment of the plans as they've been presented by MassDOT on February 13th. And I think folks should just feel free to throw out their thoughts. Meredith, I trust you to capture them well, because I think the goal is that we would cohere all our thoughts into a letter to MassDOT so that they could have our opinions on record, hopefully to shape whatever stage of design comes up in the future. So PTAC members as well as community members should feel free to contribute. And yeah, let's hear your thoughts. What do you think about the design? Yes, please.
It seemed like a little bit of a bait and switch where all of the presentation materials showed two-way bike lanes on both sides of the boulevard, and then it turns out it was just the 2 blocks of this had that. But I raised a question about between Broadway and Medford Street, basically, because there's only bike lanes on one side of the street, and I think Brad had mentioned, I don't know if I'm under the bus, but he said that Dana Street is a small residential street where you could bike, but that's actually one way in the opposite direction. And so I did send an email to MassDOT and Transportation about that, but just wanted to, if we can push that a little bit more. Great.
I know that the bike committee is also advocating for a similar thing.
Awesome.
We have a hand online.
Oh yes, go ahead, Laura.
Yes, I don't know if we have a picture of this, but I believe that in general, the concept proposed is 2 lanes with a median of trees down the middle in many cases. And I would like to speak against that median of trees for a couple of reasons. That we know that a hard median between oncoming traffic makes drivers feel safer and makes them behave less safe. A raised median makes it harder to rearrange the lanes later if you wanted to, it sort of locks us into that configuration. And that it doesn't really do anything to protect, provide shade to anyone except people who are already in cars. So I would like to advocate for sort of moving that width of trees to one side or the other to create a better sort of provide some more barrier between pedestrians and cars rather than cars and cars.
Cool, super helpful.
That does make sense.
Yeah, I would second that thought about the median, and also it seemed like they had the travel lanes going down the middle of the right of way, and some of the comments I had seen were comments like, could we actually get housing, back in that corridor? And so if they actually move the travel lanes, to one side of the right of way, it would have more space on the other side for green space, additional uses, instead of having it sort of being sliced into 3 different green strips.
I see a question in the Q&A from Mary Kate. Mary Kate, would you like to speak? Instead of just typing your question in, you'd be welcome to. We could ask you to unmute, I think. I think I can let you unmute actually. Hold on.
Oh, well, I have more yet.
Oh gosh, here we go. We don't do their names. Oh yeah, there you go. You should be able to speak now, Mary Kate. Oh, or maybe not. Oh, great. I'll read your comment. I am very concerned about the removal of the Otis Street footbridge. Good. I was hoping that we could discuss this specifically. This bridge is really important for students going to Edgerly and East Somerville Community School, and we already know that hot crosswalks are unsafe on a road like this. Just for folks who might not know what this is referencing, Mass DOT is maybe perhaps talking about putting a hawk signal in at the location where the Otis Street footbridge would be removed. Just to continue with Mary Kate's comment, we already had a tragic death at Kensington Street, and Mass DOT was only able to make that crossing safe by reducing traffic lanes and adding a speed bump. Thank you, Mary Kate. I'm curious how others are feeling about the Otis Street footbridge question as well.
I mean, I'll second that as a parent at the Edgerly. I mean, I think we have no clarity on the timelines for how long we're going to be there. It's probably, I mean, let's just say 10 years or more. And that will, probably have to be used again at some point in the future for other school communities. And I don't know exactly what their timing is on, exactly when they're planning on doing that with respect to the rest of the improvements. But I know a lot of families really count on that elevated crosswalk and would be really, feel very unsafe about a hawk crosswalk. And it would increase, then car traffic, because if you don't feel safe, then
One thing that experiencing some other pedestrian ways, like the one that's over near Paul White path in Brighton, so many of the pedestrian ways, like they cost a lot to maintain, and long term they really aren't maintained as well as they should be. So there's some concern I have. Will it stay something nice if we keep it? And I just don't know that it will. So it just becomes crumbling infrastructure, where maybe we can focus more on other ways the crosswalk could be done to make it a safe place to cross, rather than maintaining a bridge over the road, because that's still just giving priority to the cars in the area rather than focusing on the pedestrians.
I did have a daughter. My daughter went to the PHA middle school, and we crossed McGrath at Pearl Street. And we found that we just wouldn't go out of the way for that that bridge because it slowed us down too much. But yeah, it was still, even with a crossing guard, a little bit harrowing with the number of lanes on. So I'm hoping the narrowing will help a lot. But yeah, I don't know. I know some people really like the bridge. I hate the bridges because it's so much up and then back down, and I never feel safe on them, even as a big guy. It's just they never feel structurally safe, or you're very isolated from everything else.
I want to go to Heather behind me. I don't know about this particular footbridge, but my experience with footbridges is, and perhaps climate change will take care of this, but that they're almost never plowed. As was said, they aren't maintained, and I personally don't use them unless it is made impossible for me to get across the street any other way. So if, on the other hand, you have footbridges that are maintained, that are accessible, and all of that good stuff, and people use them, then I would not necessarily get rid of them. And I wanted to make a comment about two-way bike lanes. Introducing two-way bike lanes ought to be extremely heavily signed. Not only that, remember that there are people with visual impairments, whether temporary or permanent, who need to know. And because my experience of bike riders is that they don't slow down for crosswalks as often as they should. In Cambridge, I was arguing against the moving of a bike lane to the other side of Mount Auburn Street, right in front of my retina doctor, where I come out of there totally blind. So I just think it's a really important thing to remember safety for everybody, because the bike riders are not gonna want people stumbling in there either. So, thank you.
I will speak up just briefly on the maintenance question. I think historically, like plowing has not been great on this bridge, but there was a lot of advocacy because of the school situation, and it's actually been really good all winter. They've done a really great job of clearing it, which was really surprising. So.
I'm going to speak to what Mary Kate's saying about the hawk. So sorry. Regarding the hawk signal, is it a MUTCD requirement that it be a hawk signal when there's not an intersection there, or could it be like a regular, green, yellow, red stoplight there that requires, more attention from most drivers than a hawk seems to?
Do any of you guys know the MUTCD
I
requirements there?
actually do know that answer. The MUTCD is a lot more flexible than it was even just a couple years ago. So there is, it's called engineering judgment, where you can, and the hawk is one of those areas where the designer does have a certain amount of engineering judgment, and signals in general. However, a by the book read of the requirements, it probably, and I can't say because I haven't looked at any of the data that comes out of it, but my gut feel is that the data alone, just following the strict guidelines in MUTCD, it would probably lead to a hawk signal there. So,
I just would add, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe MassDOT has specified what the traffic control would be at this intersection.
Right. Yeah, it's up there.
Just to be clear, I don't believe they have proposed the hawk, but that's a good point that they may be where they're headed.
Right. And
the city doesn't have any control over, it doesn't have any authority or direct control over it. Yes, we have the ability to comment and negotiate and so forth, but we don't have direct control over it. And I wouldn't say that the hawk usage that we've done so far in the city has really lived up to the expectations that we had for them. So we wouldn't necessarily favor that in this location from the city's perspective.
And just before I go to Ted, I just want to note that Mary Kate has said that, has basically like reiterated your suggestion, Preston.
I was just reading what she.
It was vice versa.
Oh my God. Amazing. Thank you guys for doing my job for me. Go ahead, Ted.
So I was also going to reiterate, same suggestion, and I just would point to the examples on Somerville Avenue at Loring Street and Lowell Street, where there is a red, green, yellow crossing for pedestrians that has been there before the hawks were installed, and they seem to work really well. So if we could advocate for that in letter, I would support it. And well, the floor is just gonna second also what Laura said earlier about the trees in the middle. I agree with that. And I think on that same topic, the sidewalks seem a little bit too narrow to me in the renderings. I know it's not a bold sign, but I would advocate for wider sidewalks, because I think that's been, I'm thinking of other areas in the city like Beacon Street that have been redone with sidewalks where you have to kind of like squeeze to get by with even, a couple people can't pass each other. These look a little bit wider than that, but I think there's sort of probably no limit to like how wide the sidewalk could be to improve the pedestrian experience. So let's advocate for that more.
I just want to follow on. Could I request that if the committee is recommending wider sidewalks, that you say what width you're recommending and not just say wider? because having something, being able to say they accomplished the goal or not accomplish the goal it gives you a certain amount of power.
Great point. Do you have a,
Sorry.
do you have a specific number, Ted,
I
in
don't think I have a
mind?
number, but I think it should be at least enough that, so let's say like 2 groups of 3 people walking abreast and pass, would be some kind of standard like that. I'd like to see where you can just like a comfortable walking with, so maybe we can, if other people have suggestions of specific numbers or anything, we can talk more about what to propose, but something like that.
Thinking about the community path extension, it's the difference between 12 and 14, for instance. Because the community path where it's narrow, I think, is down to 12. And that's sort of, that's 4 people abreast, or 2 people going one direction, 2 people coming another direction. So maybe at least 12, I don't know. But just trying to set people's ideas, because we had that whole discussion of the bridge over the Mystic where they narrowed it from 14 to 12. And that really makes it go from this is nice to this is cramped, I think.
For what it's worth, the community path, the extension is 10 feet wide nominally. 12 feet wide is what the older portions of the path are, like between Willow and Central.
Thank you.
Willow, Cedar.
Go ahead, BJ.
Maybe there's a chance to transfer the ownership of the maintenance of the bridge to the city, in a similar way we did with the bike path. And maybe that's a way to, get them to keep the bridge and maintain it properly from our side, because the city might just not care. It's too small for them.
What do you guys think about that?
Honestly, we probably shouldn't comment.
Got it.
This crew here doesn't actually do the maintenance.
Yeah,
That would be a DBW thing, and I wouldn't be appropriate for us to tell somebody else what they should or should not accept.
Do you want to explain though how we would take on an asset that would belong to us? The ownership of that?
I mean, we could do that, because we do that from time to time, and that is a negotiation that does work. And I think the community path extension, actually, the entire community path is an example. I don't think we own any of it. Okay, there's a small section, but effectively we don't own any of the community path from Cambridge to Cambridge. We have a license with the state where we have sole authority, if you will, to operate and maintain the path. And within some restrictions, great and small, depending on the location, we have the ability to do upgrades and so forth with the state's permission. But it is a piece that we have to know is coming, that we have to negotiate. It's a very long negotiation because it's a very detailed legal agreement. But we also have to work with DPW and our maintenance professionals to really define what the cost is associated with that and have that budgeted, because they have substantive costs to that. And in the case of the community path, we had to buy new equipment so that we can maintain it properly. We have other similar cases where we take on less so roadways, but the Dilboy Fields along the Alewife Brook, that's all owned by a DCR, but we maintain them and we have agreements with them, with the DCR to maintain them. The same with the Blessing of the Bay area. So these aren't unreasonable concepts, but they are challenging.
I will put in a quick, integration of my own 2 cents here. And then also I have a question for the group. One, I think that it's great that these concept designs are narrower than the existing roadway today. But I am a little concerned about all the turn lanes that are coming up on the at the intersections, because I think in some places, like, they widen the road from like 4 lanes to like 7 lanes, which feels just like really unnecessary. And also, if the plan is like trying to prioritize safety at intersections, which we know are where conflicts happen most of the time, then it seems out of line with the goals of the project to like introduce that many more lanes at the exact place where the most conflicts occur. So I would love to see not as many turn lanes in the plans. The question that I have for folks is on the question of transit on this corridor. Like there's no bus lane the full length of McGrath proposed in the plans. So I'm just curious how folks are thinking about that, and whether they would like to see bus lanes on the full corridor, or whether that's not something that is a priority for folks. Yes, Karen. I can ask you to unmute. Yes. Oh, no, go ahead.
Yes, yes, I would like to see a bus lane. I think that somebody even mentioned in the audience of the McGrath meeting, how about moving the trees out of the center lane and putting a bus lane down the middle? I don't know that I have a strong opinion about that one way or another, but I do believe that a dedicated bus lane is needed on in both directions. At the time of the meeting, when MassDOT was asked about this, they said they didn't see any demand. And I thought that was a peculiar comment because, I mean, we're building this for the future, and it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. Like, the MBTA didn't want to plan a new with the bus network redesign a couple of years ago, they didn't want to plan a bus route on McGrath or put existing routes further on McGrath. I mean, obviously, like the 90 turns around on McGrath. There are a couple of small, and the 87 goes like, partially onto McGrath to O'Brien and whatnot to get to Leechmere. But in terms of, future, they didn't want to plan routes on there until the McGrath Boulevard, plan, got rejuvenated, which it has right now. So, it's kind of like which comes first. But I think that the demand comment was a really odd one, because we're planning for the future here, not current case. So.
Well, on those lines, the bus network redesign suggests to put 2 lanes on Cross Street, and we could advocate to move them over to McGrath to create that kind of like an excuse to say there's something that you can actually, design for on this. But then the question for the group is, do we think the bus lane will be better at McGrath than at Cross? Or should it stay at Cross?
In my opinion, they put them on Cross because that was available at the time. That's what I was thinking, that they were avoiding McGrath on purpose, because they did say that they didn't want to put anything on McGrath. But it seems to me, I mean, McGrath is a wider. We can't really predict what's, McGrath, there's going to be so much redevelopment down there, in the next, 10 years or something. So it's a little hard to, predict everything. But I don't know, in my opinion, I think putting one or more buses, especially a high frequency situation on, I mean, we're trying to connect, right? We're trying to connect, East Somerville, south, right? We need more north-south connections than the 90 on Cross Street. So.
Yeah, I think a center running bus lane on McGrath would be fantastic. Yeah. Especially for better connections to like Assembly Square.
Right.
Yeah.
But also to connect to, Cross Street already connects to Broadway, but McGrath, basically funneling any road with a dedicated bus lane onto Broadway would just create a full corridor with only bus lanes, which would just be incredible for frequency and service. Yeah.
There's always also the element for emergency vehicles getting through that the bus lanes serve an amazing path. And I think that that's something that doesn't always come up as much, but having at least 2 lanes in the new design for McGrath could mean that maybe not now, but someday that goes to 1 lane of pedestrian and then emergency and bus for the others. Not pedestrian, personal. You need all
Cars.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on any topic?
I would also advocate moving the 90 onto the McGrath with a bus lane. I literally live on the 90 on Highland Avenue and don't take it to Assembly Square. I do a zip card to Assembly Square because it's so slow through cross street. And God help you if it snows. I think, you know.
That's a great point about the bottleneck.
I would say I would not support bus lanes on McGrath if it's any more pavement than the renderings already have. I think the renderings have way too much pavement already. I would, of course, be supportive of taking some of the existing travel lanes and making them bus lanes, but I would be concerned about suggesting to MassDOT that they should add lanes.
Yeah. That's a good point to explicitly outline. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Vishal?
No, I think the point of not moving the bus to McGrath is probably related to the schools and kids. Like, do we think they're going to be safe on McGrath to get on the bus? Or, you know, is cross just better in that sense?
I don't know. I turned to the parents in the room.
Yeah.
Like boarding the bus at one of the floating bus stops.
Yeah.
In the center
McGrath.
lane.
Yeah, that's the thing,
If
right?
that's
If it is on
where
the
they're
center.
proposing putting it. Yeah.
So, noting that we are nearing the end of our time, or I mean, we're over time for the discussion. I'll just say it. But it's been a good one. I think important. I'm hearing that some of the main points that have been made tonight are that we have concern with tearing down the Otis Street footbridge, but also recognize maintenance challenges and future challenges. So perhaps we can advocate for just really, really robust, safe crossing at that intersection or at that area, including a full, red, green, yellow stoplight, not just a hawk sign. Also hearing support for bus lanes on McGrath, as long as it does not mean adding more pavement to the area, removing the median, and kind of shifting it to one of the sides for green space and shade for pedestrians rather than for cars. Then kind of enhancing the bike committee's advocacy around two-way bike lanes on, two-way bike lanes on the full length of McGrath, right? But also noting that they should be very intentionally designed for safe pedestrian crossing as well. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I missed something in the Q&A. Let me just go in there before I finish up. One place, okay, from anonymous attendee, one place where intersection width doesn't align with existing city plans in the latest design, turning left from McGrath northbound onto Highland, Medford Street has 2 turn lanes. However, the Gilman Square plan, at least the latest version I'm aware of, calls for the closure of Medford Street Bridge to cars, making it head bike only except for emergency vehicles. And Medford Street was also closed for a long time during GLX construction, and we all survived. Yes, we did. In the short term, I understand it helps provide some flexibility for detours given all the construction happening in the city, but I hope the city is committed in the long term to closing the Medford Street Bridge to through traffic. In that case, 2 turn lanes are not needed, and that's one way the intersection could further be narrowed, crossing made more pedestrian friendly. Awesome. Thank you so much, anonymous attendee. So yeah, support for reducing the turn lanes. Karen, to your question, I don't think a suggested sidewalk width was decided. I think Christopher threw out the suggestion of 14 feet at least, because that's the width that we were advocating for with the Mystic River Bridge. Does that seem like a width? Yes.
I would doing some and Google Maps of sidewalks. It looks like the widest sidewalks I've seen in Somerville are on Broadway. I don't know if that's correct. And there looks like between like 16 and in some cases up to almost 25 feet in some places. So I think that might be a good benchmark for sidewalk width.
Yeah.
20.
Great.
I'm not actually not opining, and I don't think city staff should opine on what you all recommend. But distinguish between the clear sidewalk width and the sidewalk width plus street trees.
Yeah.
Because those are different concepts and they're different widths.
And not just street trees, there's a whole slew of sidewalk furniture, whether it's the new trash cans we're getting that are taking up sidewalk space, or even the vote, ballot drop boxes. And that's not counting things that businesses put out, which I'm all in favor of. These things they make the streetscape much more human scale, but it does take up that space.
Sorry, Ted, what were you gonna say?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna ask if we know if there's a standard width of the graph of the cross section we're working with. I mean, it looks like it's about 120, 125 feet.
It's not standard, but that presentation has a few representative examples.
So maybe for the exact width, we can say like at least 16 feet, which seems like the narrowest on Broadway, but maybe look at like some NACTO guidelines and kind of see what they recommend for a large, wide roadway like this one.
And we'll say that I don't think there's a particular rush, so you guys don't feel you need to decide in the next 6 minutes exactly. They're working on it. There's some time if you guys want to take time to install.
So, a quick question. I think you said there were curb separated bike lanes the full length, and that wasn't the case from what I saw in the presentation. Like going over the bridge into Cambridge, that was not curb separated.
The Squires Bridge,
Yeah.
in particular, Squires Bridge is not part of the grounding of McGrath project. So both projects are assuming there's a different Squires Bridge project that does include. Okay, I don't quite remember. I don't know if they've actually presented it. But they're both assuming that the other project isn't happening, because that's how you design projects. You plan for them as if they were all done, but you have to actually design them as if neither are done. So, so they're not going to show something on another project that hasn't been funded and designed yet. So.
And I really should have said they're proposing separated bike lanes on the full corridor. I don't think that they've shown the detail of at grade or what the separation is. They're just colors on a concept at this point.
Yeah, some of them it doesn't even show flex posts. It just shows like paint, like a little bit of buffer. But I have an 11-year-old, and that's does not seem safe enough for him.
Okay. So I think my proposal is that we draft a letter based on all of the feedback that's been collected today, and then bring it to a future meeting for discussion and approval. Like Justin said, this is not a case where we have to get in our letter by a certain date. So I think we can be a little bit more patient with it and maybe more intentional with it. If that sounds okay to folks, well, actually, let's vote on that first, and then we can decide who can write the letter. So I motion to write the letter. Do I have a second?
Also, thanks, Ted.
Thanks, Ted. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Great. Who would like to write the letter? Can be multiple people. If no one says anything, I'll just volunteer myself and then you'll all have to
Again.
feel guilty.
I can help, but I can't take it on right now. I'm trying to have better boundaries.
Yes, please. I love that for you, Meredith. Great. You know, if I have a month to do it, I'll be able to get it done. It's all good. Wonderful. One thing that I recognize that we kind of bulldozed over our third agenda item on FY25 budget priorities. So perhaps with the last 3 minutes of our time, I would love to hear if there are any priorities that folks are thinking about advocating for, because we're in the maybe not very, but early stages of the budget preparation process. And I know that the mayor is like seeking input. There was a public hearing 2 nights ago, but we obviously missed that, which is totally fine. The one thing that I think would be really awesome for us to advocate for, if folks agree, is continuing the transit benefits program, because it's been funded with ARPA dollars, which will run out. And as we've heard in previous meetings, the program has been really transformative for residents, both in getting them to use transit, not cars, but also in serving some of our most vulnerable populations. So I would love to advocate for an extension of that, but I'm curious if anybody, and I should say that that has been echoed by a few city councilors, Benue and Campen, and I think Judy Pineda Neufeld maybe advocated for it as well. I don't want to say that. Okay, definitely Benue and Campen.
Not on the record.
Not on the record, thank you. What do folks think? Are there other things that they think we should advocate for? If not, then that's fine too. You don't have to say anything. Would folks support advocating for an extension of, or not an extension of ARPA dollars, but like funding in the municipal budget for the transit benefits program, or no? Yes.
I do.
Yes.
Amazing. Then maybe that's just a really short, like paragraph length letter to the mayor, maybe with like Jake Wilson, who's the head of finance committee, CC'd, which I'm also happy to put together. I motion that we advocate for that in a very short letter. Do I have a second?
A second. Or Peter, I'll put you down.
Amazing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Wow, we did that in 3 minutes.
Amazing.
That's so great.
Alessandra, I have a 10-second
Please.
FYI that I skipped in my city update. Just to say, we had a pop-up event for New Neighborway on Glen and Otis Street last weekend. There's the website there, somervillema.gov/Glen and Otis. And then we're planning on April 2nd to set up a mock-up of the intersection from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. Feel free to stop by. Don't stop by, totally up to you. But you can check out some of the intersection treatments. And we're asking if you have any feedback on either that or the slides to give it to us by end April 26th. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks everybody for another great meeting. Thank you to our guests, really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your night. Goodbye everyone on Zoom.
Yes.
Question for you anyway.
You like that picture?
Is this what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
do you see that?